It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour of The World This Week. In partnership with the Daily Beast, we say hello to foreign editor Christopher Dickey.
Nice to be here.
Busy times.
Very, very busy, and I didn't get much sleep. So.
All right, we'll be gentle on you then.
Please.
Also with us, Pierre Asqui, his latest book in French, The Right to Happiness, France and the Challenges of Globalization. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you.
And with us as well, Nupur Tiwari, journalist and the Europe editor for Indian television channel NDTV. Nice to see you. We'll be joined shortly by Anne-Elisabeth Moutet of the Daily and Sunday Telegraph. The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag World This Week. It was clear from the outset that this French presidential election campaign would upend politics as we know it in this country. The mainstream parties started to crack at the seam during the primaries last fall. Ethics scandals, the surge of anti-globalization candidates, spurring a rejection of the establishment. Now, with a little more than 24 hours of campaigning left, another precinct's heard from a 39-year-old convict targeting police on Paris's Champs-Elysées, killing an officer, injuring 3, dying in a hail of bullets, and Christopher Dickey, well, stealing everybody's attention.
Yes, well, it's not like people didn't know this was likely to happen. In fact, the security services, some of the advisors to the various candidates, they have been just waiting for this kind of incident. And I think it has, because somebody was actually killed, because this attack was carried out on the Champs-Elysées in such a public place and the way it was done, it has actually overshadowed what could have been a much worse attack that was stopped by the intelligence services and the police earlier in the week, when there were 2 men picked up in Marseille who had 6 kilos of explosives, and as well as Kalashnikovs, all the things that you would need if you were an agent of Daesh or the so-called Islamic State in order to carry out a truly horrendous terror attack. And that was averted. So I think it was kind of inevitable that something like this would happen. Ah, I see Anne-Elisabeth.
Anne-Elisabeth Moutet who's joining us now here in the studio.
Hello.
Many thanks for joining us. Anne-Elisabeth Moutet of the Sunday Telegraph, taking her seat. Christopher Dickey, let me ask you, because one of the issues we've just heard from the Paris prosecutor this Friday, and he was saying that they had picked up the suspect a little while back. They'd found a mask, knives, and weapons, a GoPro, but they didn't have enough to hold him. What was your reaction when you heard the prosecutor say that?
Yeah, well, I thought, what more do you need? But I guess the legal system is such that it's very hard to hold people for any length of time on mere suspicion. Of course, that's part of what Marine Le Pen was saying in her statement today, is once they start to be truly suspect, they should just be picked up preemptively and put away, or shipped out of the country if they're not citizens, or be stripped of their citizenship if they're dual citizens. So I think this is a moment where those kinds of radical ideas are going to be put forth because people feel that the justice system hasn't really been doing its job.
All right, before we ask about Marine Le Pen, Anne-Elisabeth, you were not far from the Champs-Elysées, of course, when all this
Actually, that was literally at the corner of my street. At the corner of Rue de Berry, and Rue de Berry gets into my street, so just about 200 yards from me. And quite honestly, you did not see any panic in the street. I heard the helicopters above my head, and I saw people walking in the street perfectly normally, getting into hotels, and then we started seeing our police cars all around. But there has been a description of panic, and I've been reading the descriptions, and from what the accounts I got afterwards in the neighborhood, it wasn't. It's this very strange thing in which, you know, the event happens and it can be horrendous, and if you're a few paces away, you don't see anything.
Are the French showing British flagmen now? Is it something that's become so commonplace?
You know, I was writing a piece this afternoon, and I called it more the Lebanization of France. And the question was, will this impact the election? Which I suppose everybody's asking. And to some extent, I think there has been a kind of it's desensitized to some extent. It's horrible. People are frightened on the spot, but I'm not sure it's going to have an influence.
Desensitized? So does that mean it'll have little impact on Sunday's vote?
Difficult to say, because I think those people who anyway are buying into the fear politics of Marine Le Pen are likely to be even more convinced. But I think that I do agree with Anne when she says that people are not in that massive state of panic, because this has become so commonplace in France now that people are beginning to take it in their stride. But that said, I think the problem of homegrown terrorism is something that no matter who is elected will have to deal with. And the more we start looking at it as homegrown terror, the more we will be able to combat it. So I don't think that the solutions are coming from this kind of nationalistic fervor that we are seeing across the political spectrum, where everyone's talking about, I'm going to protect France, I'm going to give it back the dignity it needs. We are missing the point over here. In fact, I would like to take you back to a few weeks back. It was on the 19th of March. There were thousands of people out in the streets of Paris protesting police violence. Now, this is one thing that we do not really hear of in the political discourse at all. So we are trying to pin the blame here and there and everywhere else, but we are not looking inwards in France. And that, I think, is the big problem. It's a big hole in the political discourse today in the presidential elections, according to me, because it excludes a big part of the of French citizens, of the French population, who want to hear more about it, who want this to be addressed. And they are consistently disappointed because from Marine Le Pen to Jean-Luc Mélenchon, there's perhaps not even a single presidential candidate who's willing to tackle this, really.
The attitudes towards the police, of course, the nation, when they hear that a policeman had succumbed to his wounds, that two others had been injured, a lot of sympathy that we've seen over the last 24 hours. But Nopour, right, that the police, people feel ambivalent about it, had felt ambivalent about it up to this point.
Well, the whole issue is how to deal with such a case. I mean, and I think the political answers that we had are really related to that. Do you preempt everything? That means as soon as someone shows signs of being anti-police or anti-establishment or risking to become violent, you lock him up or you expel him from the country? Marine Le Pen has proposed to expel every single of the 15,000 people who are on the terror watch list, you know, the so-called Fiche S suspects, who haven't crossed the line, but who haven't
been convicted of any crime.
Yes, and so I don't know how legally she can expel them, but that's what she's proposed. And on the other side, you have Emmanuel Macron, who this morning on the radio was saying, I'm not going to produce a new security plan overnight. We have to deal with it, and we have to get build up the country and implement our program. So I think voters have got these two choices. Either you follow Le Pen and Fillon, who are the two law and order candidates who are ready to twist the legal system and the traditions of the country, because this guy had shown no sign of Islamic radicalization.
But every sign of wanting to shoot policemen.
Yes, but he had also mental problems.
I don't care that they have mental problems.
So what do you do with him?
Every time.
What do you do with him?
He was a lone wolf and he had mental problems. To kill someone, you have mental problems.
Yeah, but what do you do?
Somebody who had been 15 years in jail because he already wanted to kill police, if you have a whiff that they might be doing it again, I mean, that justifies...
And what do you do? On which ground can you jail him? Or lock him up, or you create
we have 1/5 of the population of jails in France right now who have not been judged yet.
Well,
it's not as if it's something brand new.
If I might, a couple of things. First of all, I think it's interesting that, going back to the original point, the effect on the elections, clearly the so-called Islamic State wanted to hold these elections hostage to terrorism. They wanted to be the decisive factor in these elections. That hasn't happened. Oh, no, I'm not saying they could be, would be, that they wanted to be. I don't think there's any question. That's what the Marseille plot was about. When it comes to what you do with people, years ago I was writing about maximum security penitentiaries, prisons in the United States. And I said to one of the great authorities, what do you do? These guys, all they want to do is escape. All they do is make trouble. They're lifetime criminals. How can you possibly parole them? How can you deal with them at all in prison? And he said, how old are you? And at the time I said, about 40. He said, well, you know, about your age, they just sort of lose it. they quit fighting, they quit trying to get out, they just lose that drive to do things. And that's part of the criminal justice system. So you've got this 39-year-old guy, and they're looking at him.
He had not lost it.
And I guess maybe he was afraid of losing it. But they just were not going to, eventually the justice system is not going to keep wrestling with this guy.
And to the point made earlier by
years old.
Napur about how in France, the fact that these people are French nationals is not something that politicians or citizens really want to confront all that much.
Well, I mean, actually, Pierre was just saying that Marine Le Pen would throw out 15,000 people who are fichés S, but that isn't true. That isn't what she said. She would throw out the ones who are not citizens of France. That actually, that's hard to argue with. Yeah. It's hard to argue. Maybe if Marine Le Pen says it, you say, well, anything she says is wrong. But this is just part of the problem in dealing with her. Some things she says are pretty much common sense. Why on earth should those people be allowed to stay in France?
And by the way, she's not...
The intelligence service prefers to have them under watch than deal with them openly, because they are a source of information. And watching them is a key element
believe me, I know how that works,
but
if you're talking about 15,000 people, I don't know what percentage of them are foreign citizens, but why keep them in France? They're not going to be such a good source of information that the intelligence service can just follow them, keep track of them all the time. And we have seen from Mohamed Merah on that they lose track. They make mistakes.
But these are not the ones who are going to be expelled if they are not foreigners, if they are French-born.
Merah was French citizen.
Which is why we have to come back to that question as to whether this securitarian approach to resolving this problem of terror in France, we need to get out of this discourse, because this is not going to be the solution. You can send the foreigners out, but if the solution is to address the problems at home.
Well,
there are massive problems of violence that are not restricted to the violence only coming from a minority towards the majority. And the reason why these strains of extremism are actually thriving in France is because there is a larger framework where there is another kind of violence that exists, where people feel sidelined, where people feel outnumbered, where people feel discriminated and attacked physically, in the case of police violence in the suburbs. And this is what creates this atmosphere of violence. And unless and until we are honest and address these issues, we are just going to increasingly see these so-called lone wolves or people who lose it or not, I don't know, whatever it might be.
I have a question.
But this creates an atmosphere where you cannot address one kind of problem of violence and not the other.
How do you explain converts? Because many of those acts have been perpetrated by converts who suffered no discrimination when they were growing up, who were French, and
That's
who converted
not the point.
to
The
Islam.
point is not that the person
is a
who
question.
carries out the act-
I would like the answer. I would like the answer.
There is no justification for any act of violence. That's not what I mean. What I'm talking about is a larger atmosphere. It's the larger environment in which these things are legitimized.
Well,
it's
the
not
problem...
looking at the...
I have an answer for you.
The problem with that...
it's Olivier Roy's answer, which
Yes?
is...
The French sociologist.
Yes.
A specialist of Islam.
Yes, who says that radical Islam is at the moment the most radical offer on the market for someone who is rebellious and who wants to change the society. When I was 15, I was a Maoist.
I remember.
and that was the most radical offer, and we didn't kill anyone, fortunately.
No, but we have Sartre to thank for that.
No,
seriously, he took them together. He said violence is not the... We could have had the Red Brigades in France. We could have had the Rote Armee Fraktion in France, and we didn't because Jean-Paul Sartre told the Maoists around 1972 that they should not do it.
Olivier Roy, who has been a Maoist himself when he was 15, same way.
Well, you can't go to ENA, you're a Maoist, it
explains that this is part of the equation, is that he talks of the radicalization of Islam rather than of the Islamization of radicality,
yes,
rather than the opposite. That means people who want to deal with the society, who don't find a place in this society, go to the most radical offer on the table.
The problem with these overarching theories is that we are dealing with a minuscule group of people.
Yep.
Who actually act and carry out terrorist acts. If we were talking, there are what, 7 million Muslims or people of Muslim backgrounds in this country. If we were talking...
Which is a large minority. It's not a completely insignificant minority.
I didn't say that it was.
But what I'm saying is that the number of actual radicalized people is not that high.
Well, it's a tiny number.
And it is insulting
They are not
to
the only
vast majority to say that the conditions in which they live, which are the same for everybody,
that is not what
explain what happens to this tiny minority.
But to come
I'm
back
not
to
talking about the perpetrators themselves as being people who were directly discriminated against. You have to see the difference that I'm trying to make between... the point that I'm trying to make is a larger point, which doesn't mean that it's a naive point to make. It would be naive, I think, over here to sit and try to resolve this case of the attack that happened on Thursday and to profile these people and to analyze it, whether it's the psychoanalysis or whatever it is that we're going to try and discuss over here at this desk. That's not going to find the solution. What I am talking about is a larger problem. And when I'm saying that when Chris was talking about a small minority, the Muslim community is also a minority in France, but it's a large minority. They have a set of serious problems which we are not even willing to create a space to discuss.
Not all of
them. No.
Not the majority of them.
There is a structural problem.
If I could make a compromise position between the two.
You were a Maoist once.
Which was not a compromise. I think you're right in a way that we have to deal with these inequalities, discriminations, social issues, cultural issues, identity issues in a major way that hasn't been the case until now. And at the same time, deal with the security question, because you cannot do one if you ignore the other one.
But you can't only talk about one.
And the mistake that the law and order candidates do is that they only want to deal with it with the security
through the prism of
repressive
one way.
one.
Almost forgotten in the fray, last week's attack against the Dortmund team bus. Originally, an Iraqi was arrested. Now the main suspect, a dual German-Russian national accused of buying derivatives so he could bet against the club on the German stock market. And the interesting point in all of this is, that we've talked about the new normal here. What does that say, though, that somebody thought that this is a way of making money, actually?
What's surprising about that? I mean, there have always been swindlers. There have always been people who were blackmailers. There have always been these kinds of people around. What was interesting about that was to see who was cautious and who was not in branding this a terrorist action. There was a lot of jumping on this. Oh, it must be more terrorism. It tells you that. But there were certain giveaways. First of all, the terror note didn't make any sense if you know anything about jihad. And secondly, the police themselves were super, super cautious about it, which is one reason that a lot of the reporting yesterday was super cautious. You can't jump to the conclusion that everything is a terrorist attack. There are a lot of lunatics in the world who have violent means.
All right, when we come back, we're going to look at the other issues, the big ones that have rocked this most unpredictable of French presidential election races. You're watching The World This Week.